I want to pivot to talk about a current conflict, not necessarily a future theological conflict. Let's talk about Iran a little bit. And what I want to talk about specifically is our Iranian policy or policies. Let's listen to President Trump talk about Iran's nuclear program, first on Sunday and then on Wednesday. So just listen to this for a moment.
Is the goal of these talks limiting Iran's nuclear program or total dismantlement?
Total dismantlement.
That's all you'll accept?
That's all I'd accept. You know, civilian energy often leads to military wars, and we don't want to have them have a nuclear weapon. It's a very simple deal. I want Iran to be really successful, really great, really fantastic. The only thing they can't have is a nuclear weapon.
Is it the U.S. position that Iran can have an enrichment program as long as it doesn't reach a weapons
We
grade?
haven't made that decision yet.
Nancy, what's our Iran policy today?
I don't know. I'll do my best, though. I mean, he has basically said, I think we're leaning towards this idea of total dismantlement. That sort of appears to be where they're trying to go with it, but practically speaking, can they get there? Why would Iran agree to that? And there's no indication that they're willing to. I think there's an assumption that's happening that because they've lost a lot of power and influence in the region between their proxies being weakened in Lebanon and in Syria and in some cases in Yemen, that somehow Iran is in a vulnerable position. And I would argue that actually, if you're Iran, because of those losses, that the nuclear program becomes all the more important. I think the United States is approaching it as though Iran is at its weakest and not maybe considering that that very weakness makes it harder for them to really consider a program where they would truly dismantle their nuclear program.
Asma, inside the White House, are there different factions on the Iran question?
I mean, I think there certainly are different factions within the White House. I mean, the other factor I will say is that I'm actually unclear, though, as to how and what Trump fundamentally wants. I don't have a clear sense of that. I will say, like, the talks are ongoing. They have said now they are meeting again this Sunday. Will it actually lead to any sort of deal before he heads to the Middle East, before the president heads to the Middle East? No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, these are just ongoing talks, but I think the White House feels optimistic about the fact that they are continuing to talk.
You do a lot of reporting inside the White House on these factions. Are there distinct hawkish, is there a distinct hawkish group and a distinct dovish group?
I don't know that there's a distinct dovish group. I don't know. Does anybody think that there's a distinct dovish group? I mean, I think
maybe
that Trump,
quasi-isolationist? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Trump as a whole, I think his foreign policy is hard to parse as to where he himself stands. But I don't know that there's a dovish group, or what I would describe as a dovish group within the White House. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it seems to me that we actually do know that it's not about ideology for Donald Trump, and that, in fact, often, in my view, we over-prioritize here in Washington the idea that there is a consistent ideology or a policy goal. Donald Trump's goal, we actually know his goal here. It's to come out with the biggest, bestest, most importantest deal that there can be, because he's looking for his Nobel Peace Prize. And I don't say that lightly. This is something, first of all, people didn't take seriously enough. But even in his first term, Donald Trump, it wasn't what the hawks in his own party or even in his own administration wanted. He was looking for an opening to talk to Iran in his first term. This is in part, he sees this as unfinished business from that. And he is looking for a goal. And part of the risk, and we've debriefed many people who worked for him in national security roles, as you have, Jeff, in Donald Trump's first term, the fear that his own people always had was that he would make a bad deal because he was so eager to make a deal.
But the irony of that, David, is that the thing he fears most is having his Iran deal be equated to Barack Obama's deal.
That's right. And when he's seen headlines on stories that we've all done here that do that comparison, he hasn't reacted well to
Well, tell me more about that.
Well, the fundamental problem that he faces right now is that his criticism of the Obama 2015 deal was essentially twofold. That you didn't stop them from being on the pathway to a bomb. In other words, didn't dismantle everything. So as soon as Trump pulled out of the deal in 2018, the Iranians were able to go reconstitute their program, within a few years. And the second problem he had was, and this was a legitimate criticism in my view, was that the Obama program was on the clock. And by 2030, the Iranians were free to do whatever they want. Now he keeps saying they just can't have a bomb. Well, that isn't the issue. The issue is, can they have a pathway to a bomb in case Trump or a future president pulls back. And that's the problem that Steve Witkoff's got to get at. And it's the one they've been
Witkoff is
talking
doing
around.
the negotiating on Trump's behalf.
That's right. He's doing the negotiations. He's up against an Iranian negotiator, the foreign minister, Arachi, who was the #2 negotiator in the
And
previous deal.
Witkoff has no previous experience negotiating nuclear deals or anything other than real estate deals.
None. And the guy he's negotiating against, Foreign Minister Arachi, knows every single inch of the Iranian program, from the getting of the fuel to the enrichment, all the way through. So President Trump wants a really short deal, not the 150 pages of the Obama era one. I think the Iranians see that as an opportunity to have vague wording about what they can do. And the Iranians say, look, they're a signatory to the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. That means they have the right to enrich. The question is, can Witkoff talk them out of enriching?
All right. Nancy, go into this a little bit more deeply, because I'm very interested in the role Israel plays here in this drama. Obviously, Iran has argued and fights against Israel, doesn't believe Israel should exist. The Israelis have been extremely worried about Iranian nuclear potential for 20, 25 years. The current prime minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has signaled to us in manifold ways that he trusts Trump to deal with Iran more than he ever trusted Obama or Biden. But here we are, when he seems to be looking for a deal, as Susan suggests, at all costs. So where does this leave Netanyahu in his relationship with Donald Trump right now?
Well, the truth is it changed in some ways quite dramatically this week, in that we really saw more public tension and an expression of frustration after the United States reached a deal with the Houthis that essentially said, you can continue attacking Israeli ships. And then we started to see strikes by the Houthis into Israel. And remember that the Houthis are backed by Iran.
Right.
And so I think we saw a major shift where that sort of promise that the U.S. and Israel be lockstep with if there was a threat from Iran, seemed to be fraying. To me, what's interesting is what happens if Israel decides, as Trump has said, that you have to deal with your threats as you see them. They strike at Iran and need U.S. support. Will the U.S. come through? The indications we got from the White House today was that they wouldn't, but that would be a major break.
When you say the indications, go into that a little more deeply.
Well, we heard a lot of tension between the two. The president essentially said, we are here to strike deals for the United States. We're not here to strike deals for Israel. And so when they struck the Houthi deal, he said very frankly that this was a deal for U.S. interests and that Israel had to look out for its own defense. But what does that look like? Because if Israel goes and does that and then needs U.S. help, is it clear that the United States will come
Or if
through?
it goes and doesn't need U.S. help, but has nevertheless ignited a conflict in the
It's
Middle
almost
East.
impossible to imagine that, though, Jeff, because the Israeli capabilities are somewhat limited here. And the question is, do they want to strike at the Iranian facilities, but not really destroy them? Because it really takes U.S. weapons to be able to get into the deepest of the
2,000-pound
facility.
bombs, the deep
right, to
penetrating
get to the
bombs.
Fordo site, which is built inside a mountain.
Right.
And so there are very few scenarios in which there's an Israel-Iran conflict where the United States doesn't get sucked in.
Well,
Go ahead. No, I'll come back. But Asma, as someone who's reporting in the White House every week, you at all surprised that Donald Trump would kind of tell the Israelis, well, look, I made a deal with the Houthis. They're going to stop attacking American ships. And your problem is your problem.
I mean, I will say I was surprised, given the sense that, broadly speaking, I think that there was an expectation that he was going to be, and he presented himself throughout the campaign as being, I think, a strong supporter.
Much stronger than Joe Biden in
exactly,
his
right?
argument.
And look, I don't think this is not just the Houthi statement this week. I think it's notable that the president's traveling next week to the Middle East. He's not visiting Israel. He's visiting 3 Gulf countries.
Right.
Part of this is also, I think, the fact that the war in Gaza rages on. He doesn't really want to be connected
And there are
to
more
that.
hotel building opportunities
In the Gulf region,
Sorry
certainly.
to say it, but
Yes.
that's the reality of this trip.
But yeah, no, I think I'm surprised in that regard. On the other side, I will say though, I mean, Trump has often presented, and we can talk about this as, we'll probably talk a bit about like India, Pakistan. I mean, broadly, this administration's view is sort of like, we don't want to be engaged in other wars. We want to step out of it.
Susan, I want to talk a bit about India and Pakistan.
Okay.
Not that Asma is directing, but she is. I mean, it's very important, but I think you had one quick point to make on that.
Well, I think that people didn't understand that Donald Trump had a much more charged relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu than his campaign season rhetoric would have it, and actually never got over his fury with Netanyahu for calling up Joe Biden and congratulating him for the 2020 election.
It came up during the Time magazine interview.
Yeah, exactly.
Which was, in ordinary politics, a very normal thing to do. You congratulate whoever wins the election. But for whatever reason, Trump was offended by that.
Well, it's Donald Trump's litmus test.
Right.
It's all personal for him.
Right.
And again, it's not about policy. But I do think that not visiting Israel this week is very notable because Steve Witkoff was also in charge of negotiating a ceasefire that was going to be a permanent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. That has failed. The administration doesn't want to call attention to the fact that Witkoff has failed to produce a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. He has failed to produce a meaningful ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. And now Trump has given him this other assignment with Iran.
He's a busy guy.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the next 5 minutes, we have to talk about Pakistan, India, Canada, and Denmark. So I will try to keep my questions short, but I do want you to listen to J.D. Vance talking about the India-Pakistan conflict. I mean, obviously, it seems to me that it's America's business when two nuclear armed powers seem to be escalating a war, but J.D. Vance has a more nuanced view. Let's listen.
What we can do is try to encourage these folks to de-escalate a little bit, but we're not going to get involved in the middle of war that's fundamentally none of our business and has nothing to do with America's ability to control it. America can't tell the Indians to lay down their arms. We can't tell the Pakistanis to lay down their arms. And so we're going to continue to pursue this thing through diplomatic channels. Our hope and our expectation is that this is not going to spiral into a broader regional war or, God forbid, a nuclear conflict. But sure, we're worried about these things.
That sounded like hopes and prayers, right? We're offering our hopes and prayers that this will not escalate.
Well, what it sounded like to me, stay on this, is a little bit like we're no longer the superpower that dispatches the Secretary of State to go stop people from fighting.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would assume, I shouldn't say I would assume. Look, I don't think that it benefits, I would say certainly Pakistan, or neither India, really, to escalate in this situation. And if they could find a way to de-escalate in an off-ramp, they would be open to it. No country, certainly not the United States, is publicly offering that leadership for an off-ramp.
David, is this war America's business?
Any time that two countries that combined have probably 400 or more nuclear weapons come together, it can become your business really quickly. And that's the problem here. And back in 2001, when there was another one of these really bad conflicts, Colin Powell went over to Delhi and to Islamabad. And I remember him saying to me one time after he was done with this, it had been his plan to make sure there was a senior American in one capital or the other so that these countries would not head into the worst of this.
Right.
And, what have we seen now? Just in the past few hours, attacks directly around Islamabad on some of their military bases.
Right.
That's a great point. But they were also doing it in the first Trump administration when there were tensions in 2019. Mike Pompeo writes about this in his book about the U.S. intervention, that this was the U.S.
Former Secretary of State.
Excuse me, yes.
Yeah.
And by the way, Rubio has been in touch with the parties all week, so it's not like they weren't involved. And so this idea, this has been the role that the U.S. has played as a broker, and to say right now, at the height of tensions, we're stepping back. There is no one else to fill that void that the U.S. has, as you know, since 2001, and certainly before that, filled. This is not the time to sort of change the fundamentals of how we approach these conflicts.
Susan, I want to play something that President Trump said about two of our allies, Canada and Denmark, and then I want you to comment on it and then tie it up into a very neat package.
I asked you if you would rule out military force to take Greenland, and you said no, you don't rule out anything. Would you rule out military force to take Canada?
Well, I think we're not going to ever get to that point. It could happen. Something could happen with Greenland. I'll be honest. We need that for national and international security.
But you are not ruling out military force to take Greenland.
I don't rule it out. I don't say I'm going to do it, but I don't rule out anything.
Susan, we have a lot of problems and challenges in the world. Denmark, which owns Greenland, is a NATO ally. Why is the President of the United States threatening a NATO ally with military action when there's so much else to do?
Jeff, I don't think we need to get inside Donald Trump's brain or pretend that we understand him to look and see. This is the through line of Donald Trump from the minute he stepped on the public stage, is attacks, often inexplicable, on America's allies, and praise, often inexplicable, for America's adversaries. And that is the one consistency that we've seen from Donald Trump, a man who can change his mind 3 times in one day on what our actual goal is in Iran nuclear negotiations. But right now, the fact remains that Donald Trump, a little bit more than 100 days into office, is threatening Denmark and praising Iran. Okay, so we are in a kind of an Alice in Wonderland situation. And that, I think, is the longer term damage to the United States. You asked to put it together. What I would say, and I've been thinking this week about the passing of someone we all know, Joe Nye, great professor from Harvard, came up with the concept of soft power, America's soft power in the world. Donald Trump is trading that away because leadership was our power in the world.
That's a pretty good answer. Thank you, Susan. We're going to have to leave it there for now. We'll be talking about these things, obviously, in the weeks to come, but I want to thank our guests for joining me. I want to thank you at home for watching.